welcome back to the channel. Today is our fourth and final of the athletics deep dives, covering the Disarm action. So Disarm is an athletics action targeting a creature's reflex DC. And on a success, you quote-unquote weaken your target's grasp on an item, meaning until the start of that creature's turn, attempt to disarm them, gain a +2 circumstance bonus, and they take a -2 to any attacks or checks requiring a firm grasp of that item. And on a critical success, you actually manage to disarm the target, and the item falls out of their grasp onto the ground in their space. So let's get the elephant in the room out of the way, which is that Disarm is pretty widely regarded as the weakest of the 4 athletics options. So the first reason why Disarm is not that great is that it requires a critical success to actually disarm something. And even if you're fully investing into the disarm action, a critical success on an on-level opponent is still going to be pretty unlikely. Now you might say, well, okay, fine, but at least on a success, you're giving the target -2 to attacks and things that require the use of that item. And while that may be true, this effect only lasts until the start of the target's turn, meaning that as soon as their turn starts, they re-grip their item for free, and then they can have all 3 of their actions to make attacks or use that item with absolutely no bonus or no penalties, as if you had never disarmed them in the first place. And of course, not everything in PF2 relies on a weapon or a held item to be scary to the party. Things like animals or beasts, many types of undead, and the classic dragon all are often terrifying opponents that don't rely at all on weapons. It's not all bad, however, because against the creatures that do rely on their weapons, they often rely pretty heavily on them. Oftentimes, if you disarm a creature of its weapon, it's only going to be left with its unarmed attacks, which may not even be listed in the stat block because the creature hasn't at all invested into making them scary. On top of that, many creatures in Pathfinder have kind of scary follow-up effects based on hitting you with specific strikes. So if a creature has a strike with their axe and then has a scary follow-up action after that, disarming them of their axe not only deprives them of being able to use it for damage, but also deprives them of being able to use that follow-up action against you. And additionally, if you can somehow manage to disarm a creature on their turn, the success effect of disarm will actually last until the start of their next turn. This means that if you manage to disarm them right after their turn begins, they'll take that -2 penalty through their turn, through everyone else's turn, so for any reactions that they may or may not have, all the way up to the start of their next turn. Which means for at least that one turn, the disarm penalty is actually going to be pretty significant. So, let's look into the different ways PF2 allows us to make disarm as usable as we can make it in the system. Starting with the ancestries, and there are actually a number of ancestries which allow you to disarm without a free hand. The Gonzi, the Gripply, and the Lizardfolk all have various feats which grant an unarmed disarm attack that doesn't involve your hands. The Gonzis uses their tail, and the Gripplies and the Lizardfolk uses their tongue. Additionally, Inventive Offensive from the Gnome allows you to add the disarm trait to a weapon you wield until the first time you deal damage with it. However, probably the most interesting of the disarm ancestry feats comes from the uncommon versatile heritage, the Ifrit. At level 9 with Scorching Disarm, once per day as a single action, you can disarm a creature without the free hand requirement, and if it succeeds, they take 46 fire damage unless they drop the item. And on a critical success, they take 46 damage and drop the item. So this is a way to, once a day, deal a pretty significant amount of fire damage and also get a free disarm attempt at the same time. Now moving on to the class feats, and starting with Barbarian, at level 8 we get Disarming Assault, which for one action allows you to strike and, if you hit, disarm that foe. Note this doesn't ignore multiple attack penalty, but it's still 2 actions for 1 action, so it's good extra economy if you want to be disarming. Additionally, at level 12 we have Embrace the Pain, which as a reaction, if you get damaged by a melee attack, you can immediately attempt to grapple the creature or disarm the creature of the triggering weapon. Now moving on to the Fighter, which actually has a number of disarm-related feats, starting with Disarming Stance of 6. Now, to be in this stance, you have to be dueling, i.e. have a single one-handed melee weapon and have your other hand free. But if you are, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to all checks to disarm. And in addition, you can disarm creatures up to 2 sizes larger than you. Next up is Dueling Riposte at level 8, which requires you to be benefiting from Dueling Parry, which is itself a level 2 feat which allows you to emulate raising a shield as long as you're dueling. But if you are benefiting from Dueling Parry and a creature within your reach crit fails a strike against you, you can, as a reaction, attempt to either melee strike or disarm that creature. And this leads to Improved Dueling Riposte at 12, which grants you an additional reaction at the start of every one of your turns to only make Dueling Riposte. However, this can be used even without benefiting from Dueling Parry. Next up we have Disarming Twist at level 10, which, so long as you're dueling, allows you to strike with a weapon and substitute that weapon's attack roll for a disarm action. So if you hit with the weapon, not only do you deal normal damage, you also apply the normal success effects of the disarm. And finally we have Twin Riposte at 10 and Improved Twin Riposte at level 14, which are effectively the 2 weapon fighting versions of Dueling Riposte and Improved Dueling Riposte that we covered earlier, allowing one to, so long as they are benefiting from Twin Parry, reaction to strike or disarm opponents that crit fail strikes against you, and with Improved Twin Riposte, gain an extra reaction to do exactly that. Now moving on for Fighter, we have the Monk class, which gets a stance at level 1, the Reflective Ripple stance, which grants you a +1 on your check to disarm, and is a prereq for the level 8 Rippling Spin feat, which, as a reaction after you're hit by an attacker, you can step and then attempt to disarm that attacker. Next up is the Ranger, which at level 10 gets Twin Riposte, and 16 the Improved Twin Riposte feats, which are effectively carbon copies of the same fighter feats. And finally we have the Swashbuckler, who at level 1 can immediately pick up the Disarming Flare feat, which means whenever you succeed an athletics check to disarm, the circumstance bonus and penalty last instead of until the start of that creature's turn to the end of your next turn. Meaning that not only will they take that -2 to attack rolls throughout their entire turn, but that +2 circumstance bonus to disarm will be active for you on your next turn if you want to try again. Additionally, the target can use an interact action to adjust their grip and remove this effect. However, this still causes them to waste an action, and this is usually going to turn out pretty good for you, especially if you're a gymnast, because if you are, succeeding on your disarm checks gains you panache. And finally, I want to once again shout out the Psychic's Conscious Mind, the Distant Grasp, which, if they amp Mage Hand at 4th level, allows you to disarm creatures with your Mage Hand. Notably, if the Mage Hand manages to disarm the creature, it immediately grabs it, which means you don't have to spend extra actions trying to knock that item out of the creature's space, because as soon as you disarm the creature, you can immediately move the Mage Hand as far as you like and get that item away from the creature, significantly lessening the chance that they can actually regain that item easily. And now finally for the archetype which supports disarming, which is the Duelist archetype. Now most of the Duelist feats that support disarm are actually carbon copies of fighter feats. Disarming Stance Dueling Riposte, Improved Dueling Riposte, and Disarming Twist are all available to the duelist, but they're plucked straight out of the fighter class, just given a 2-level bump. However, duelists do have one unique feat to them, which is the Selfless Parry at level 8. This allows you to use Dueling Parry to benefit your allies as well, granting them a +1 circumstance bonus to AC. And in addition, allows you to actually Dueling Riposte against attacks that critically fail allies adjacent to you. Which means now, so long as you're with friends, your enemies don't have to actually specifically target you for you to benefit from Dueling Riposte. They can target any one of your allies adjacent to you, and as long as they crit fail that strike, you'll be able to Dueling Riposte right back at them. And now, as always, let's end with a little sample build where I explain how I would probably build a character if I wanted to take advantage of the Disarm action. First, I'm gonna probably try and figure out if I can become an Efreet. It is an uncommon versatile ancestry, so I'm gonna need GM permission. However, if they allow it, at level 9 I can pick up Scorching Disarm, which it's only once a day, but it still is a basically free fire damage for doing the thing I want to do anyways, which is disarming my opponents. So for class, you might expect me to go with Fighter, because it does have the most amount of disarm-related feats. However, I'm actually going to choose Swashbuckler, and that is for one reason, which is the Disarming Flare feat at level 1. Disarming Flare fixes my biggest gripe with the Disarm action, which is that it's only really useful on a critical success normally. Normally, on a success, the penalties only last till the start of the creature's turn, which means unless they have a reaction attack or something like that, they aren't going to feel that circumstance penalty to check with the item that you try to disarm. However, with Disarming Flare, on a success, that creature is now forced to either waste an action or take that -2 penalty for all 3 of their actions for anything they attempted to related to the item you're disarming. However, that is only one level 1 feat, so to supplement that, we're also going to go into the Duelist archetype. This allows us to pick up Dueling Parry at level 4, which when combined with Selfless Parry at level 8 and Dueling Riposte at level 10 grants us a +2 circumstance to our AC, our adjacent allies a +1 circumstance to their AC, and a reaction, disarm, or attack against any creature who crit fails an attack against any one of us. Finally, at some point we can pick up Disarming Stance, which grants us a +1 circumstance bonus to disarm, as well as Improved Dueling Riposte, allow us to attempt that Dueling Riposte twice per turn cycle. What we end up with at the end of this is a perhaps surprisingly defender-sided combatant, someone who spends actions to Dueling Parry, granting themselves and their allies AC bonuses, and then is able to knock weapons out of enemies' hands as a reaction when their enemies crit fail attacks, as well as on their turn attempt to loosen the grips of enemies on the weapon, and if they're lucky, cause them to drop the weapon entirely. However, even on just a normal success, because of that Disarming Flare feat, their opponent is still going to take that -2 to all attack rolls for their entire turn. So, in conclusion, there aren't really the tools needed for Disarm to become an all-encompassing activity. It's still going to be worthless against things like dragons, of course, that don't use weapons. However, Disarming Flare by itself kind of saves the disarm ability. Sucks that it is kind of a feat tax if you ever want to disarm someone effectively. However, with just that one pickup, suddenly disarm goes from being something that is hardly ever worthwhile to something that's like a pretty reasonable option to help uh, defend yourself and your allies from your opponent's attacks. However, the real benefit of Disarm and all the athletics actions in general are just that they are all athletics actions. Meaning, if you want to be good at disarming and grappling and tripping and shoving, really all you need to do is become legendary in athletics and pick up a +3 item bonus to your athletic skill, and you're kind of set. All of these feats that I've just gone over the past few weeks addressing are definitely good bonuses, and they really up your ability to perform these actions, but you're always going to be a baseline level of competency for performing these athletics actions just by virtue of having training in athletics. What this means is that, somewhat contrary to what I've been presenting, is it's not necessarily the best idea to go all in on one athletics action, because there are just going to be times where that athletics action isn't going to be useful. Disarm obviously has times where there aren't going to be creatures who use weapons, but even something like Trip isn't useful against creatures that don't care about being prone. Thus, instead of investing specifically into just disarming or just shoving or just tripping, kind of picking and choosing feats that benefit all four of the different athletics actions and using them each when the situation calls for it can actually be a better use of your feats and abilities than just doubling down and focusing on making one as good as you can possibly make it. So with that, this concludes the final of the athletics deep dives that I'm going to go over. This general athletics and all four athletics actions in PF2 covered in the deep dive format. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it informative. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing next, so I'm going to have to figure that out before next video, but I hope you return to come and see it. Regardless of any of that though, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.